I had a fascinating conversation with Jung. He's a Korean-based neurologist who wrote a book called A Brain for Innovation, The Science of Imagination and Abstract Thinking. There are 4 things I'm going to briefly cover here: default mode, bed, bath, and bus, abstraction, and place cells. To help people think creatively and strategically, it really helps to try to understand the underlying fundamental sciences that influence creative thought. And I'd summarize his key takeaways into 4 things. First is we need more time to enter the default mode. Second is that there are ways to do this. Third is strategies are abstractions. And fourth is place cells can help us land strategies. So let's talk briefly about default mode first, also known as task negative network. This is when a person's at rest, when we're not focused on external tasks. A task positive network, which is the opposite of that, is when we're actively performing a task. It's involved in external oriented attention. So when we're scared or under a mission to achieve something, we revert back to task positive networks. And unfortunately, in our modern lives, when we are all pressed for time, we spend a lot of time in task positive mode, which not help us come up with new ideas. We need to create space to move into the default mode. Only then does the brain let unexpected connections happen. Those connections create novel ideas. Some of those ideas may be valuable. You can't know ahead of time which ideas will be. So how do you get into default mode, and how do you help your clients get into default mode? Where there's some specific ways to do that. Min suggests bed, bath, and bus. Bed is taking a nap, sleeping, the unusual combinations that appear in your dreams pop up. Bath is to relax while you're awake, and bus is just moving locations. Maybe you take a walk or you go to a cafe, etc. Third thing, abstract thought is the ability to understand and think about concepts that are not directly related to physical objects or experiences. Min says, for example, when we talk about a car, the car is not a physical thing. It's an idea. And all the strategies that we use when we're facilitating or strategizing are abstract ideas. There is no first mover advantage. There is no blue ocean. There are no physical barriers to entry. These are not existing in the physical world. So when we are facilitating strategic conversations, it's helpful to understand how important it is to introduce new abstract concepts in order to shift and shape the introduction of new ideas. Be aware of what is the abstraction that's currently dominating in the conversation, recognize that, and introduce a new one. Finally, place cells are neurons. They're located within the hippocampus, and they're triggered in response to an animal entering a specific place in its local environment. They're like GPSs for our brain. And when we're in a familiar space, our place cells basically tell us where we are. They're helpful. But when we enter a new space where we've never been in before, our place cells are not helpful. So we get overwhelmed. We think more. When you walk into a new town that you've never been in before, how you're hyper vigilant because your place cells aren't guiding you and telling you where you are. Now, when you introduce a new strategy, let's talk about how this relates to strategy. People may feel that they're not in familiar territory. They may get scared. They may get confused. And by introducing an abstract idea that represents the strategy in a way that is familiar to them, you can move them back away from fear towards comfort and give them access to the default mode. And you know the famous ones are like a city on a hill. We're going to climb that hill, crossing a bridge to the future, building a foundation for the future. These are all metaphors that we often put our strategies in. And why do we do that? Because they create a sense in people, we've already been here before. This is not entirely new. You can calm people down, and it helps inform what actions we want them to take.